I'm going to start with my first question is around self-assessment. In the job search stage, it's sort of like going through all these different stages. The first stage is you have to get over being laid off because it has nothing to do with you personally. So if there's any kind of negative baggage, just get rid of that because other people are in the same boat. And the first question you have to ask is, what do I want to do? Because if you don't know where you're going to go, well, you don't know what road to take, or any road will get you there. So the first question I always have is you have to spend that time on self-assessment. It might be just 5 minutes, or it could be, 5 weeks. But the first question I have is, what should people think about when they're assessing their career and life choices as they go through job transition? And I wanted to direct this to Liz and to Mike to answer the question.
Right. And I just have a corollary to that. If you don't know where you're going, you'll get lost. I think if you don't know where you're going, sometimes you can't get lost. So, that may define my life. I don't know. Anyway, so I'm now going to give you some very pragmatic advice to that answer to that question, which is, what is your financial runway? So a lot of times people don't actually think about how long can I live on the money I have, or am I prepared to live on the money I have? And that often influences the path you take, in the sense that you either build on the strengths. If you have a 2-month runway, that's quite different from a 16-month runway. And you have a little bit perhaps more luxury to investigate other options if you have a longer runway. So I always encourage people to, do the painful budget and figure out where one can cut back. And I'm probably talking to people who already do this anyway, but just my, really pragmatic advice about job search.
I apologize. I'm getting over the flu, so if you can't hear me, just raise your hand and I'll try and speak a little more loudly. There's a lot of people going through job changes right now. It's just the number of hands in the room are kind of a bit of alarming, but I was thinking about it. This is the second downturn in the last 10 years, and I was joking with Liz and Mark. Last time we were in this situation, I believe I was interviewing at Spencer Stewart, and we were just tipping down into that downturn. And it's going to be tough, but we'll get through it. It might be a good time for you, if you have time on your hands. We'll do what I call vision forward. Think about what you want your life to be. Your job is just part of a bigger portfolio of things that you do in your life. You've got your family, you've got your job, you've got your friends. But really what you want to do is take the opportunity to think about where you want to be in 5, 10, or 15 years. And don't think of it in terms of your job. Your job is just a vehicle to get you to where you want to be in life. Do you want to be, super wealthy and have, fly on your private jet and have the place up in Napa? Well, you can do that in 10 or 15 years, but it generally involves an incredibly successful IPO, and you will not have a life between now and then. And you have to be willing to make that sacrifice. It could be as simple as I want to have a work-life balance. So if you do want a work-life balance, maybe you join a larger company. You still get a very rewarding professional career experience, but at the same time, you may be only working 10 hours a day and 50, 60 hours a week versus 80 to 120 hours a week in an early-stage company. But to your point, Liz, about having a goal, if you have a goal and you can get yourself and your family bought into kind of the life we want to lead, the rich life we want to lead, that helps you make those decisions between today and then, because it may involve a move outside of the Bay Area, and that's never a comfortable decision to make. But I've placed people recently, I've moved them from the Bay Area to Ohio because it's a great job, and they'll be able to come back at the appropriate time. If that goal sets the context for a lot of the decisions you can make, and it helps you think of it in terms of a series of steps rather than one big commitment to a life-changing event that's going to be maybe a job outside of the Bay Area. Or if you do take that job, is there a circuit back? So just practice what I call visioning forward, and that'll help guide you to where you want to go, and put some context around the decisions you're going to make in your job search, because it's going to be a lot. Your choices are going to be fewer. So when you do have some choices, if you have that context, you'll be a lot better off.
Mercy and I work very closely together, and one of the things that Stanford alumni have access to is a workshop called Career Life Vision, and I think it fits to what you're talking about in vision forward and just thinking forward, what is that, both work and home, and what does that mean?
Mine's trademarked, so you can't use it.
I mean, there's another thing called spouses, and maybe all of your spouses do work or did have jobs and could work, but I know a lot of people whose wives, husbands, whatever, are going back to work, trying to go back to work, and some have been successful doing that, so that's a sort of obvious pragmatic thing. I actually had another thought about if you decide that you want to change careers completely. I always wanted to be a landscape gardener or architect. I'm a software engineer now, or I'm a CFO now, and I'd love to be a. Look in your network to see who might be in that profession or lead you to someone in that profession, and do some informational interviewing. What's it like? What are the sort of skills that somebody brings to this, and what are the downsides of this kind of? Because I think a lot of people come in, at least to my office, and have this sort of jolly, blue sky kind of idea. And I'm not one to put a damper on blue sky ideas, but you also have to have the pragmatic part, which is, do you know anything about it? Have you really investigated it? Is it something you think you might like to do? So, again, if for all of you are thinking about switching professions.
There's a book called Working Identity by Hermanina Ibarra. She's from INSEAD. And that book talks about you're almost doing that future self, or through happenstance you meet people and you get connected. And I know that when I was thinking about a future self, the book really resonated with me. And it's that kind of go talk to those landscape architects. The next question I have here is, what advice do you have for people in evaluating their strengths and their competencies? And Kelly, I thought you and Patty could offer your perspective on this. Okay. Kelly, you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's probably the most important thing for you to do, whether you're currently employed or looking for a new role. And it's not often something that we teach really well in business schools, although I think that is starting to change. I think there's a couple of ways to go about it. One way is to re-engage in some type of leadership development programming. So whether that's through a university base, I know Stanford offers several programs, UCLA offers several programs. Every major business school offers some type of leadership development program that's focused in and around you and understanding kind of who you are. And through those programs, you're going to go through a variety of different self-assessment instruments. So, for example, tomorrow we're offering for UCLA Anderson alums an opportunity to take part in a self-assessment instrument that we use quite a bit in our executive education programs called the Berkman. And there's lots of them out there. So even if you're currently in a company or you've sat through your organization's leadership development program and you've been Hogan'd or you've been Myers-Briggs or you've been DISC'd or you've been Berkman'd, it really doesn't matter which instrument it is, because it will help you connect the dots. And I think that the more you can kind of go back and reread some of that information, even through looking at it through a different lens of where you are today, it'll help give you some insight. A lot of those programs will also do 360 assessments, assessment centers. I think one of the biggest things that you can do, and I think actually you don't have to participate in a formal program to get a lot of this information. What you need to do, and which none of us have a whole lot of time to do that when we're trying to make our numbers and drive our business, is you just need to reflect. And a good part of self-awareness, whether you use instrumentation to help kind of give you some language to put a framework around your behaviors and your strengths and your competencies, is really being able to sit down and say, well, where was I good? And why was I good? And what was I doing when I was good? And where was I maybe frustrated? And why was I frustrated? And, well, what do I need? It's an okay thing to ask. And I think that that's actually a leadership skill that we need to have even as we're managing throughout the organization. And what we find in a lot of the work that we do is missing with a lot of executives. So I think that by that reflecting, whether you do it through a journal, which I always say I'm going to do and I never do, whether it's It's sitting down on a Saturday when you're doing your yard work and a situation pops into your head and you're like, wow, I maybe could have handled that differently, or hey, this is where I was really good. And it's getting feedback. What an opportunity now to expand your network. So, I go and visit clients, and Dean Olean would like for me to make a whole lot of money to bring into the school, right? That's my job. But what I'm finding is that I'm giving clients hugs, right? Not literally, but kind of I am. I'm sitting down with them and I'm asking questions like, I don't really have anything to sell you today, but what I want to know is your leaders of tomorrow, what do they need to do differently? What do they need to know, right? You can take that same kind of concept, and I've had these 45-minute to hour-long conversations with executive vice presidents of global companies where we just are talking and having a dialogue about it. Take that same concept and do it with your network. Where am I good? Or why you're good, and why are you good? And how can I be more like you? I think is one way. A couple of ways.
Thank you. Patty?
Well, first of all, I'd like to know, besides myself, how many of you in this room consider yourself a baby boomer? Thank you. And Gen X. Any Gen X? Did any Gen Ys manage to sneak in? Under the radar? No, I didn't think so. So what I would call you all are mid-career professionals. In other words, you've got a track record under your belt. You've been working a while, and if you haven't figured out what you're good at by now, folks, you need more than career coaching, you need therapy. Because the thing is, when you're looking at this, it's not about what you did, and this is where people get mixed up in evaluating strengths, and I'm not a testing person. I try and take the simplest, most direct route in looking at who you are and what you have to offer. Where people get mixed up with it is how do those strengths, how do those abilities, how do those skills translate into the future opportunity, not where you've been. And too often when we talk about ourselves, when we write about ourselves, and I'm not just referring to your resume because the world now is so changed with Web 2.0 that everything you say and do, online, offline, reflects your brand, your strengths, and your abilities. Everything you say, you can't refer to all of this as if it was your obituary. You are constantly ongoing now marketing yourself. This is just the way the world works. So in looking at that, how many of you are looking at not just an active job search, but the industry or sector, and high tech is not a sector. High tech is this just huge umbrella with lots of stuff in it. But the sector that you were or are in now, how many of you are looking at getting out of that and doing something else or moving into a new sector? Okay, and how many are just staying exactly where you are and you want to just do more of the same of where you've been? Okay. In both situations, those of you that have to translate your strengths and abilities, you really have to work at literally a translation, because my esteemed fellow panelists that are recruiters here, it's really hard to sell them that you have an ability or an experience that's not in the industry that they're recruiting for if you're trying to move into it. And so in terms of evaluating your strengths, it's a question of are you able to also translate those strengths into accomplishments that they can understand and read, and that hiring managers can understand and read. And if it's too hard and too big a leap, then what can you do both offline and online to build a credible presence talking about your strengths and abilities in a different way, like the dreaded word blogging. How many of you have a blog? Boy, 4 of us. Yes, I have one. Yes, well, the rest of you are going to be considering it soon. Not because you want the world to find out about you, but it's a way to broadcast your strengths and abilities. Those of you that are staying put and in the same industry, keep in mind that everybody else has strengths and abilities equivalent to yours that are maybe out doing an active search. So the question is then, how well do you differentiate your strengths? How well do you niche and brand yourself to move into the next opportunity in comparison to your competitors? And there's a lot of them out there right now. So those are the 2 pieces.
Thank you. I'm going to combine the next 2 questions. What trends are you seeing in hiring? And what are the trends in hiring in Silicon Valley? And I have to start this out. I think my executive recruiter friends are hating me for asking them this question. And they won't tell you this, but the recruiting firms are down probably, 50% in employees, and even the ones that are remaining have how much less searches. So recruiting industry is hurting right now, too. So is that a good and beginning part of it? Now, why don't you tell us opportunities that you're seeing and where there are pockets? Even in New York, I found that there are pockets of hiring. So are there some areas that there are some trends, and what are you seeing?
So I want to try and put a positive spin on this, because the reality is there still is some hiring. That being said, there's a significant deceleration in hiring across the board, and I represent life sciences and medical devices, but my colleagues in the office represent technology and financial services and retail and consumer, and this is across the board. There's a strong deceleration everywhere. The other trends that are sort of interesting, companies are taking longer to hire. So I think for any of you involved in the recruiting process, you just have to be patient. In the face of all the layoffs and the downsizing, companies are very judicious about new hires. So they're all looking internally first to see, gee, can we combine roles? Can we ask somebody internally to step up or step aside, or expand their current scope of responsibility? So I think inherently, and this has happened with a number of my current clients, where they're just putting searches or openings on hold to really look internally, reflect, and see if there's anything, any solution internally. The other thing which I want to point out, I think, as potential job seekers or new recruits, I think the broader and more versatile that you can present yourself in this market, the better, because I think given that we're seeing functions combine and companies trying to do more with less, I think those people with broader skill sets in this market are going to be much better served than those that are narrow and deep. So I think the message is being a little bit broader and perhaps shallower, not in a negative connotation, is going to be advantageous. But again, patience, persistence, I think it's required in this market as well. I think just the second part of the question in terms of what areas are hiring, being in healthcare isn't necessarily a bad thing, and I think there are functions and roles within healthcare products, pharmaceuticals, medical devices that do represent opportunities, not just for HR, finance, and supply chain people, but even some marketing people. I've done a number of searches within medical device companies where there's, say, an intersection between medical device and consumer, where we'll go outside and look for, say, consumer packaged goods expertise. So I think and we can I don't want to fast forward to the later questions, but again, I think the areas, there are some large biotech companies here that are still hiring, Genentech, Gilead, Novartis, which owns Chiron. There are consolidations going on, but they are still big employers. And there's a tremendous venture capital community here that's funding early-stage medical device companies in a lot of exciting areas, from orthopedics and spine to ophthalmology to neurostimulation to robotics. This is a very innovative area, and there are jobs out there. So it isn't all negative, but it is much more selective right now.
I want a clarification on one thing that you brought up about broader and versatile. A lot of times when I'm coaching people, I know that people need to have that brand on their resume so that you can see them in a stack of 300 resumes or whatever it might be. How would you recommend people get through to you? Because you want to have a brand and have an expertise, but you also want to see that broader, more versatile. How would you address that?
You want to take that one? Let's be clear. I think that the first thing that a recruiter is going to look at is your experience and your education. So I think I see a lot of people working too hard to try and rebrand themselves. So while I think it's an important thing to do, I think you also have to be judicious and realistic about it. So again, I can't really give you a specific answer, but don't try and be all things to all people. You need to look at yourself and be introspective about who you are and what you can do, And I think there are some creative ways to broaden yourself out so more people like ourselves might catch your resume, might catch our eye. But just still be focused.
Thank you.
I think I'll just reiterate what some of the points Mark said. In a downturn, what you're going to see a couple things. The bar is going to be much higher because there's going to be more people competing for a lot fewer jobs. The process is going to take longer because there's really very little opportunity cost for the employer to drag this out until they see exactly the candidate they want to see. And you will also be competing with internal placements. I think you'll see compensation stay steady, even in the last downturn. I don't know if you saw this, but I didn't see compensation go down. It just kind of stayed steady. And right now, I think there's companies in Silicon Valley that are trying to keep that compensation from falling through some very creative ways, like forcing 1 week off a month for the next 6 months, furloughs. And you'll probably also see a lot more focus on commercially oriented people. In a downturn, you can do two things. You can cut back down to the bone, so you have people in engineering developing product, or you have people out in the field trying to give you a bigger piece of a smaller pie. The jobs that follow that as the economy picks up tend to be things like marketing and finance positions that are not controller positions. So those of you who are commercially oriented or might have a bent for that, this is the time where your services are probably needed. In terms of areas that are hiring, it's not all dark. As the big firms, our revenues are going to mirror exactly what the general economy does. So I don't care what any firm says, you're down 40%. Just look at the Dow. You're not as bad as the Dow, but we're back up. So there is hiring, and there's hiring in different sectors. You'd be surprised at consumer electronics. We have some consumer electronics companies that are hiring. The area that I think there's a lot of interest in, there continues to be interest in, is clean tech. And a lot of you might be, and we can talk about this a little later on in the question, but there's probably a dearth of talent in the clean tech sector, and there's an opportunity for a lot of you to go after that. I think there's also still opportunities in life sciences. I think there's a dearth of talent that can scale in life sciences, and those are the ones I'm most familiar with. But there's still a lot of opportunities out there. You just got to be aggressive in getting after them.
I would just add, the recovery package is rolling out now. It's starting to roll out, and I would think that there are going to be a lot of sort of government-related jobs. So I don't know how many of you feel you could segment or transition into that world, but there's going to be money for certain sectors through the government, Recovery Act. And the only other thing I would add to what these two have said is I look at every single job thing that comes across my desk, and if you're in finance or IT, there are a lot of jobs out there still. And I think if you're in marketing and retail, there are less jobs. So I know it's hard because marketing people are going to have to figure out what else to do, and that's good because they're usually pretty creative about that. But and we have some tips for you too.
It's a test.
It is survival of the fittest, by the way.
One of the things I want to add, and until I took this role in January, I also have been executive recruiter. Fourth quarter of last year, all of my searches were, you would say, all down sectors. So I did a search in automotive. It was for a director of marketing and SEO marketing. One was for financial services in a strategy consulting boutique, and that was in payments. They've slowed down, but they're going after new initiatives, so they'll probably be hiring if you want to move to Atlanta. And then the third one was in actually a hotel needed a CFO who could do acquisitions to get financing when the cost of capital is commensurate with the prices. And so we were going after people from real estate, asset management, it was kind of amazing that all of these would have been what I consider down sectors, and there was still hiring in it. So it goes back to the points that it's mirroring the economy, but there is hiring. And the way I feel about it is there are some sectors that look very bleak. I was out in New York, and there's not a lot going on there, or automotive, but there's still hiring in those spaces. I actually think that the tech sector will come back stronger than some of the other sectors, and so I have great confidence in the entrepreneurial ingenuity of Silicon Valley to find the opportunities and where there are things that are growing and opportunities for new companies. I think that's the heart of Silicon Valley and the innovation we have here. So I do think that there are positive opportunities that you can make for yourself.
Yeah, and that's the key, making opportunities for yourself. So I think everything we're going to say from here on in is going to be about how do you make opportunities for yourself. Because you can't sit by the phone and aggressively wait for it to ring. That's not a strategy now.
Yeah, if I can add one more thing. In a down economy, it does, especially in Silicon Valley, because we've already had our bloodletting. We really did in the beginning of this decade. So, and the companies never recovered. They are still running lean and mean. So, a lot of the layoffs we're seeing is a result of, them moving into different product lines or actual mergers and acquisitions like HP EDS, where that's going to be another bloodletting because they've done, another combination of companies. And you really need the old hackneyed term, the hidden job market. It's not that it's so much hiding, it's just that it's not going to be out in plain sight, and you're not going to be able to have jobs thrown at you every 2 weeks because the tide is turned. And so when you talk about you have to go out and make it, you have to go out and find it because the recruiters aren't going to have the jobs. Executive search firms are not going to have it. The companies, the jobs are there, but you have to be able to actually weasel your way into the company. You have to friend people on Facebook to get yourself in there sometimes, because an executive, they're not going to want to pay. I mean, I know you like earning a living, but they don't want to pay you, and in this kind of they hate paying you, and so they don't have to in this economy. But they still want to find the best talent. And they want to think that they're not finding people that are kind of like living in tents in Sacramento. So you really have to. You really have to find your way into a company in a way that you're not looking like a job seeker, but you're making the right kind of connections so that the door's open.
You're kind of leading into the next question, which is, I'm actually somebody that has lived through transitions and actually has learned and had some of my best personal growth during job transitions, whether it's building networks or just learning about myself and what I want to be doing. And so the next question is really, what are some of those things you can be working on, the competencies you can be building, the things you can be doing that create these opportunities? And Patty, I thought you'd have some further perspective on this, or Kelly, if you can talk about competencies people can work on.
The way I'd like to answer this question are, what are the competencies that when I'm out talking to organizations that they're looking for in their senior leadership? Because I think that might be, I think there's some specific competencies that you can work on that Patty will probably address in terms of networking and things like that. But I want to take you up to a little bit of a higher level. What we're hearing from organizations is that in the executive ranks, right, where everyone is a really strong technical player, so you're a good strategist, you're a good general manager, right? But what's missing, and there's still things missing, is that kind of leadership development piece. So kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier. Can you, as a leader, think about the organization kind of forward thinking, right? So it's this concept of strategic thinking, but it's a more integrated mindset. And so how do we build a sustainable organization, right? And then while you're making decisions and thinking about a business strategically and how all the different pieces and parts fit together, are you also looking through and making assessment of your talent, of the leaders that you're developing, the people you're bringing to the table that have different perspectives? So this kind of concept of diverse perspectives. And the third is this area of kind of innovation and design. And most of us are pretty good operators. We do our jobs really well. But can you take that to a more strategic level? And what we're finding is that all of those, kind of those three areas, that the leaders of tomorrow need to be able to kind of work those simultaneously. And that's really around leadership development. So it's knowing your stuff, what you got in your respective MBA programs, but then it's, well, how do we apply it? How do we get others to kind of follow us along? And how do we lead? And that's all kind of wrapped around this concept of global leadership. So what we're hearing, I'm hearing this consistently from, I've met with probably 25 of the Fortune 100 firms, and what they're talking about is that their leaders still don't look at the world through a multicultural, multi-generational, and global context. So being a global leader is different than, I know how to do business in Singapore, right? Being a global leader might be that you might not do any business in Singapore, but you have a whole lot of people with different ideas and diverse perspectives that work for you here. How do you leverage that to help build the organization? So I think those are some competencies that we're hearing about, and I wanted to share with you some research that the Center for Creative Leadership did that I have found to be actually pretty interesting, is that when you're looking from, and I think you can probably just get it from their website as well, is that there's really 5 keys to self-development, right? So in your organizations now, you've probably all been through some type of advanced management or general leadership program on teaching you to help your organizations transform better. So I think during this time frame, what a great opportunity for you to build your own little leadership development program using whatever sources that are out there. And so CCL says there's 5 challenges to accept when you're looking to develop yourself. The first is unfamiliar responsibilities. Do something different. So if you're either in a job search or you're potentially looking for something else, put yourself in a situation you've never been in before. You don't really have anything to lose. You just have people to gain in terms of networks. So the bigger the wall that comes up in front of you, the bigger the challenge that is, the more that's going to continue to develop yourself and develop those competencies I was talking about. Create change, right? There's a whole lot of it that goes on in the world, but when you lead change, you learn to operate in those ambiguous situations, right? Thinking strategically. So help get on a nonprofit board. Help an organization that needs to change and transform. So that when you get into those job search opportunities and you can talk about how you help transform an organization, that's huge. Take those significant accountabilities, whatever that would look like for you, managing across boundaries, and dealing with diversity. Find a way to put yourself in a situation that's different than the perspective that you have, because we learn by being somewhat uncomfortable. So those are just, I think, some areas, and I think nonprofit boards is a great example. A couple of years ago, a friend of mine decided in Atlanta, her friend died from ovarian cancer, and she wanted to do an indoor cycling, if you can believe this, Centurion 100-mile run, or 100-mile on an indoor bike, because she wanted to find a cure for ovarian cancer. And she came and started talking to me about it, and I'm like, what? What do you want to do? And the next thing I know, I'm doing a website. I'm helping her find all of these different things. And today, that organization is, giving back $400,000 or $500,000 to that research. And I look at that as, man, they drove me nuts because it was about 4 people that didn't have any kind of business sense whatsoever. But I was like, y'all are crazy and not doing this right. Sit down, let me do it. But you learn from that in terms of, well, where did I benefit and where did I not? And then you meet a whole other group of people. So nonprofit boards is a really great opportunity to understand governance and other things to do.
I have to share on the nonprofit. I had a good management or leadership team, and they said, well, let's build our own. And it was one of the best Silicon Valley marketing people here. I learned several things from it. One, it was, it's the herding cats when you're managing a nonprofit. I think we had a volunteer base of 60, 70 people. So it's the management leadership of that. Second, we had a free PR firm, and so I learned how to build a brand. We built a brand with this nonprofit in 2 years. I still apply that on the business side of how I build the brand. You've probably all heard about getting to the top. That's one of the brands that I'm now building. The third thing is I walked out of that with a network that elevated me to a completely different network within Silicon Valley of executive women. And instead of being just an attendee, I was introduced as, and here's Kathy, she's running this nonprofit for women. So I met with all the other leaders of these other nonprofits and spoke at their events. And it was a completely different network than I had been in before. So it opened a lot of new doors.
Yep. So to follow up on what recommendations I'd have for networking and building relationships. First of all, let me preface it that if you are in an active job search, there is a difference between lead generation and networking. And when you find that you are actually looking and you call up all your friends and you tell them you're looking and ask them what they know and what they have, that's lead generation. That's not networking. Networking is building ongoing, collaborative, bilateral relationships with people where you give, not just take. Unfortunately, if we haven't dug the well before we're thirsty, which many of us forget to do when we're so busy being dedicated to our work in our companies, we don't have that kind of deep network established. But it's amazing how quickly you can go deep, but it takes a lot of work at the same time. So lead generation is going after actual opportunities. That doesn't build you a network. Networking takes a time, it takes effort, it takes relationship management. It's a process that you need to work on building. Career Track came out with, and they're a newsletter that goes out mostly to recruiters rather than to people like me, but I read it anyhow because it's good information. And they did a survey of all the companies that they're working with. And they said that they want to know how they're hiring now. And they said 30% of the companies, 39, 38, 35, somewhere in there, said they were hiring internally. That's how they're filling their positions. Another 25, 29% said that they were hiring externally through alumni, through employees, and through vendors. So guess who you should be networking with? Them. Alumni, employees, and vendors. Those are your new best friends.
Right. And just because you hook up with someone on LinkedIn doesn't mean you've networked with them.
I don't look at LinkedIn as a viable networking tool. And I'm sorry, Reid Hoffman, I'm directly connected to you. I met him when he had only 12,000 people on LinkedIn back in 2003. I was an early adopter. It is a great way to research, to figure out who's here, who's there. But if you think you can build a relationship on LinkedIn, think again. Facebook and Twitter, you betcha. Combine together and not used in the egregious ways that a lot of people are using Twitter right now. From one example of the guy that said in his tweet to me, I just ate a cucumber like I care. And somebody else who every other tweet they're doing is marketing themselves, their business, their job search, whatever else it is. Nobody wants to hear either one of those. So the fine art of tweeting is another subject altogether. But the final thing when they looked at the research on Career Track was 12% of the hires were being made on job boards. 6% of that went to the big guys, Monster and Career Builder. Now, this is not necessarily the executive level, folks. This is everybody. And then the other 6% went to the niche job boards. So if you're spending all your time throwing your resume out to job boards, think again, 6%. And that's everybody. That's not just the executive level. So in looking at networking and building relationships, I would actually at this point look at it for the long haul, pretty much the way you're going to be looking at this recession.
Yeah, and just to jump in here on, Torchiana has 25 years of data on how people find jobs. 70% of people over all those years found their job through somebody who bridged them into the company. Yeah. So think about that. That's where you should be spending your time.
And you can do that on Facebook, not on LinkedIn. 220 million people. You do an advanced search by geography, by job title, and by company. Recruiters do it all the time, and they're really good because they use Booleans. How many of your engineers? Boolean search strings? They're masters at it. They take classes on how to do this. You can pull up people on Facebook you didn't even know you could even get to on LinkedIn, and then you ask to friend them. And some of them actually say yes, and then you start writing on their wall, and you build a conversation, and voila, you have a relationship that you couldn't have done on LinkedIn. So that's my 2 cents on LinkedIn versus Facebook.
LinkedIn, I mean, I generally think in-person networking is much more effective than the online stuff, and I know people disagree, and there's a healthy discussion about that. And LinkedIn does have the group feature, which if you work hard, and I've sort of used it to see if it can work for art, and the jury's out, by the way. But it does connect you to people who you then can develop a offline relationship with. So
They just closed off the group feature this week. You used to be able to see everybody's email on LinkedIn and groups. Gone.
Yeah.
Gone this week.
So no substitute for in-person. That's my opinion.
The next couple of questions were about networking and building relationships. If you have exhausted your personal networks from your active, and what are the things that you can do next as you're doing an active job search? And I think it's getting into some of the networking. What are some of the specifics you'd recommend to people?
I say you've never exhausted your personal network, because your personal network, you have this little, it's a target. You have an inner circle that's going to lead you to the next circle, that's going to lead you to the next circle, and you just keep going with that. And I think the problem perhaps with networking is, number one, people are afraid to meet people they don't know. What do I say to this person? Secondly, they don't see it actually working. I mean, it's a very mysterious thing. It works when it works, and you don't know why it worked. So people quit too early because they don't see it working. And I think going back to what are those competencies that you can demonstrate in your job search, I would just say, I was listening to the president's press conference coming down here, and he used the P word, persistence. He said, we're going to be talking a lot about persistence over the next, 4 years of my administration. So if you demonstrate persistence in your job search, what do you think your future employer is going to think about you? Hey, this person's going to be persistent on the behalf of my business. So it's a good trait to develop. Don't give up too early. Don't cave in. I see so many people cave in. Oh, I've been out this so long. Well, how long have you been looking? 2 months?
That's one of my favorite sayings. I tried networking last Thursday and it didn't work. I advise people to, I actually think the resume, and this is heresy, it's going to go the way of the albatross, but that's more of a conversation for later on. But I tell people when they're networking, you have to lead with the relationship, not with the resume. It's so much more comfortable to shove a resume out there, and all your friends will ask for one. The minute you tell them you're looking, oh, send me your resume. Don't do it. Because all of a sudden you become a job seeker when somebody's got your resume in their hands and you just want to network with them. They're saying yes or no to you, and it closes off the conversation. And your goal is to keep that conversation open for as long as possible, because you don't know what more doors will open if you can do that. So no resumes. Go out with business cards, but no resumes.
And there's a trite and oft-repeated phrase: being in the right place at the right time is being in a lot of places at a lot of times. And that's the trick of networking. Really.
One other thing that I might just add is just from the programming that we do here at Anderson, and every major business school, particularly the 30 or so that are represented in this room, have significant executive education shops, is that by participating in those programs, you're also building a network. And so what you might find is, if you have a Stanford MBA, is that maybe you head back to the East Coast and you go to an executive education program at a Wharton or a Stern or something like that. So you're developing your competencies, but you're also getting access to a whole other network. And so it's just something to think about. Of course, you can also come down to UCLA, but but I know these folks across the country, and they all run really good and solid programs that are going to be getting at kind of that next level of competencies that organizations are looking for. So think about that as well, because a lot of times if you participate in some of those programs, even if you have an MBA, it doesn't matter, because you're getting another perspective and you're getting different knowledge, and you're meeting 25 or 35 or 45 or 50 people, a lot of times from global organizations and outside the U.S., that all you're doing is adding a whole other network possibility. Some of those programs, if you can get into the alumni groups, if you do a 4-week advanced management program somewhere else, and you've got a whole nother network that you're able to link in without being linked into. So just something else to think about.
I think just to build on these comments, one of the things you have to understand in your job search is it is a non-deterministic process. This isn't engineering. You do A, B, C, and D, and you're going to get a job. You don't know in executive search, this is what we deal with every day because we have to find that next search, right? So you don't know when that next search is going to come. You don't know when that right job is going to come at the right company. So I'll give you some very practical, prescriptive advice. Identify the companies, identify the sectors you're interested in, identify the companies you're interested in, and focus on that. You can't be everything to everybody. You're going to be developing new networks through, all kinds of devices. I'm personally a big fan of the coffee. Have morning coffee with the executives. Right. That it's kind of flattering to them that you would be interested in their company and would make time to take them out to coffee and learn more about it. No strings attached. But when you do make those networking connections, it's a bit more than a business relationship. It's actually a personal relationship. You're selling yourself. You're selling yourself as a business person. You're selling yourself as a human being. And keep in touch. There's nothing worse than you can do is make a great contact with somebody and you hit it off and you never follow up. I have one of the biggest billers in our firm. I said, how do you keep track of everybody, Phil? And he goes, I just leave people voice messages on my way home when I know they're not at work, just so they know I'm thinking about them. and you're sitting there, you've had a tough day, and you get a call from Phil, and it's like, hey, just thinking about you on the way home. However, if anything ever comes up, they're thinking, oh, I'll give Phil a call. It's about being right place at the right time, but be focused because you can't do everything to everyone.
Let me add on to that sector-specific job search because I absolutely agree with that. And it has to be global. And you can do that online. It's available online. We have a global market for jobs, products, services, and companies now because of the Internet. So using social networking sites like Viadio from France, Xing from Germany, Orkut, which owns Latin America and now India, and Academy for the UK. If you post your same profile that you have on LinkedIn there, you will all of a sudden broaden the network to be exposed to people offshore that may be hiring positions onshore. So sector specific, but also target it all globally because you don't know anymore who will find you and where.
I have to go back to a comment that came up on one of the Getting to the Top programs. It follows up from what Mike said. The CEO said he got a call from one of his business school classmates. And he goes after a couple minutes, so what do you want? And the guy said, nothing, I just wanted to say hello. It's been a while. And it goes back to Phil just leaving those voicemails that even at the CEO level, they've lost touch with networking and what it means to sit down and have a cup of coffee and no one asks them for anything. So if you are in job search, your networking is having these business discussions and getting that person who you are across, that you're a really good, credible person, but not asking for anything. Instead, hey, I'm out in the market. What can I help you with? And giving back. And so just remember, the CEOs are used to everybody calling them wanting something. So what can you offer as you're calling and leaving the voicemail just thinking about you? I did want to ask our recruiters a question because networking, as I think about networking, the first call is, well, let the executive recruiters know that I'm out on the market. What are the things that you can do? You're not going to get a job on that call, but what are the things that you can do to build relationships with recruiters so when you do have a search that's fit, you're remembering those people?
They really like coffee.
I think it goes along the lines of the networking, and just to take it a step further, I think for a lot of us, it's uncomfortable just to call someone you don't know very well and just say hi. So I think one of the things that can work, it works well with us, and it also works well for us actually trying to go out and get search work. I think if you can't be all things to all people, but if you know the industry segment that someone's working in, or you know their world a little bit, and you just keep track of the news, and if you read something that's pertinent to their company or their industry, or if I work in life sciences and medical devices, and you send me an article listing some industry trends for surgical robotics in the Bay Area, or you see a couple of companies we're financing, you just shoot someone an article or something pertinent to their world where you say, gee, that person knows what I'm doing and has an interest in what I'm doing and is giving back, I'm more apt to help that person as opposed to just someone continuing to blast their resume at me. So I think, again, whether it's networking with us or whether it's networking with employers, potential employers, or even just your network, giving back, finding something that's relevant to their world and shipping it off to them, whether it's an article, a quote, or just some data, but it creates a reason to actually be touching base with that person.
You made me remember during the last downturn, there was one VP of marketing that didn't get to the pest stage because he kept sending me emails about once every month saying, here's what's going on in the market. The best ones were when he said, hey, I know this company's hiring. Maybe they can hire you to do some of their search work. So he was actually sending me leads for search work. And so he's still remembered to this day.
Yeah, feel free to send us your leads.
There's a serious point here. That the trick is, really, that if you find something of value for that person, they will give you all the time in the world because they're going to get something out of it. So that's the trick to networking. It's not take. It's give a lot, perhaps, before you get anything. And I think that's a hard concept for a lot of people to grok.
And I think people we kind of like talking about ourselves. It's just sort of what it is, right? And so if you know a leader or somebody you went to school with, or you just see a leader that you like the way they work, that there's aspects of either their leadership style or the way they run their business that you'd like to find out more about it. Marshall Goldsmith has done some really interesting work on this. Is that the part of a great thing about being a coach is going and telling somebody, hey, I think sometimes I don't. Maybe I struggle listening, but I think you're really good at it. So talk to me a little bit more about that, and why are you so good at it, and how can I be better? And that's just an idea. So it's flattering, but you're also getting to that point where you're developing those kind of leadership skills and competencies and identifying some of those strengths for you as well. So.
I love calling people and asking them to be panelists at Getting to the Top. It's very flattering, and so it's a way of developing relationships. And you better believe I get through and talk to CEOs on that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for people who are currently employed but thinking that maybe a year out they'll be making a transition, what are some of the things they should be thinking about that maybe we haven't discussed yet?
I just wanted to know, are you thinking of transitioning within your industry or a different industry? Okay.
For different industries.
Is it related? Are you in a functional place like a finance where you could make a change easily? Okay. So, because one of the things that is incredibly effective, and I can guarantee you every single one of you sitting in these chairs out here has a body of knowledge that you could turn into a white paper. And you can't believe how that paves the way. It's a nice gesture. It also, frankly, you can get out and talk to people and quote them in your paper. Mm-hmm. So if there's a way for you to do something like that, and then, of course, you get back in touch with all the people you talked about because you've got the article, and you send it on, and sometimes that thing appears in places you never believed it would appear. So just one little idea.
The other thing you can do, you see what you don't have and what you're going to need to get is street cred in the new sector. Mm-hmm. And it'll take you a year because you can't get that overnight. People in the existing sector they're in can become thought leaders overnight. It doesn't take much. But when you're moving, so you're going to have white papers, earticle.com, if you can even do a short book on the subject, lulu.com, absolutely start blogging on it. Because when you start meeting people and starting slowly networking into that sector, they're going to put your name in Google. And what you want to come up in Google, because everybody does that, 80% of the recruiters do it, and when they find negative information about you, I don't care if your resume is golden, you're gone. They won't move forward with you. And these are statistics from last year. 43% of the people that were just going to have a meeting with somebody Googled their name if it was a stranger just to find out and get more information on them. You want to come up on Google. You want Google juice. You want a lot of it. And you want it in that new sector so you have street cred in the new sector. So everything you do is build a brand online in the new sector, so you end up looking like you know what you're talking about, even though you don't.
Well, and if you talk to people if you talk to people in that sector as an informational thing and you're quoting it, you actually learn from them. So it's sort of a win-win-win kind of situation.
One other thing, if you're going into a new, this was one of the questions we were probably going to answer. You are going to be competing against people already in that sector. And I'll take clean tech for example. Like everybody comes up to me and is like, Mike, I want to be in clean tech. It's like, yeah, so does everyone else. What are you bringing to the table that's unique? And as a functional person, you've got to be a rock star in your function in order for somebody to pay attention. And you've got to stand out above and beyond the people who are already in that sector. A lot of times for emerging sector, whether it's Web 2.0 or clean tech, the talent base isn't really there yet. People will say, I want somebody who's done product management for a solar company for 4 years, and it's like, well, that's a null set. But I know a guy, Ken Fong from our class. As I met him, he's over at a solar company doing product management. I'm like, Ken, how did you end up here? He's like at Procter & Gamble, then he was at Creative Labs doing consumer electronics, product marketing. He goes, I just started getting involved. And it just so happens that my skill set and my Procter & Gamble background and the business building I did at Creative Labs was something that people in the sector didn't have. And so he had to come in at a lower level, but bippity boom, within 6 months to a year, he was promoted to VP, and now he's running all product management for the solar company. So you might have to take a step down, but you have to shine in your area, and you have to be in your functional area, and you have to have enough knowledge to have your street cred.
Well, that's a recruiting perspective. I don't agree completely. You don't have to be a rock star. You have to be perceived as a rock star. There's a difference.
We'll find you out.
And, Brian Epstein took on the Beatles as their manager by meeting them. He never listened to their music. And he was asked afterward, well, why did you become their manager when you didn't listen to their music? He said, I like them. Believe me, people get jobs because they're liked, not because they're rock stars, bottom line.
Well, let me add one other thing as I was thinking about, people trying to repot themselves, and I've seen this be very successful, but, if you don't want to take the time to write a white paper, I think it's a great idea. Some of the other things that are very useful, I know two actually very good friends of mine that made the transition from technology into medical technology. And one of the things that I advised them was go to the industry trade shows. You learn about the industry and you meet a ton of people that work for those companies. So it's a way to broaden your relationships, get smart, walk the halls, and it's a thing that everyone can do in every industry, and all the companies are there. So great idea for people that are looking to change.
I'm going to bring up the nonprofit side of it also. Everybody wants someone who's going to do work at the nonprofit, so volunteer to put on a program and call the speakers. If you're going into clean tech and you're in finance, go pull together CFOs at clean tech companies and put together a panel for, name your nonprofit that'll let you do that, whether it's, like Churchill Club or SD Forum or something like that. And then you're calling into that sector and that space. Your name goes down as moderator of that panel next to all of these experts. So when somebody's looking for the next, controller or director of finance, your name's there next to all these CFOs of clean tech. And that's the way you start working on coming up in Google and getting perceived as rock star by Mike.
And then taking that to another step is that if you start blogging and you have put a panel together, you've built a little bit of a reputation or a relationship with these people, asking them, saying, hey, I have a blog on this, would you guest blog for me? And they might say, yeah, I don't really know how to do it. Well, how about if I even write something for you? And they'll get you affiliated. So we like to call it, in executive education, affiliating yourself with the gurus. You may not be the guru yet, but if you affiliate yourself with it, it definitely helps.
What are some of the basics of re-entering the job market after being home for 10 years as a mom? Or dead.
Not-for-profits. A lot of women I know have gotten jobs that in that sector.
My husband actually has been a stay-at-home dad for the last 7 years and just went back to work about 3 months ago. And he got his job from somebody that I met at a conference that we just started talking. And I said, oh, and I knew something about third-party logistics because that's what he used to do. And the next thing you know, he got a telephone call. So I think it's kind of expanding that network of your partners and spouses as well would be one thing. And then I think just getting updated and refreshed, right? So kind of going back to what skills have changed, if you've been out of school for a while, out of the workplace for a while, kind of just getting back. I mean, it's been interesting for me to just watch my husband, who has been managing a really kind of unique household with 2 special needs kids and kind of making sure everything is set. And I've been doing a lot of traveling, and now he has a job, and he was like, oh my gosh, I've been multitasking for the last 7 years, but I've been doing it differently. So it's just kind of getting that rust sort of off of you. There's a lot of there's actually quite a few universities that, mostly on the East Coast, and I'm happy to, if you want to come down at the end, I can probably give you some ideas of some of those organizations that have these kind of onboarding programs back for women and men that are coming back into the workforce. We do at UCLA a lot of programs in kind of the diversity leadership space, and one of the big things that organizations are facing is how do we get women and even men back into the workforce, and particularly women and women of color. It's even that much bigger. Is that when your career takes that particular path and you have to make a choice, that's where you see just the numbers of women decline in senior leadership roles in organizations, and companies are struggling with how do we kind of get back in there.
A couple other data points that we talked earlier, and Stanford had a program on reentry for women last year for business school alumni. The second thing is some of the big, like you said, the partner track firms, think Deloitte Consulting, Goldman Sachs, don't know what they're doing in the last year or so, but some of the big programs started reaching back out to women and having networking events for women or stay-at-home dads, trying to get them back into the partner tracks or getting something that was more work-life balance that would work for them. And there are a lot of resources out there. I think reaching out to Mercy about the program that happened here last year, there's a ton of resources out there for people. During this transition, what are you doing differently?
You mean through the downturn? Yep. Stay close to your clients.
I'll say this. I took a full-time job instead of supporting my family on an executive search business. So I have 2 businesses, full-time businesses right now. This transition seems to be taking a little bit longer. So are there things that you're doing? I know, Kelly, it's hitting executive education, not just here at UCLA, but Stanford and across.
Industry-wide, yeah. I mean, executive education shops are down 40, 50%, which would make sense, right? Leadership development training is usually one of the first things to go with a lot of you as people leave, and typically one of the last things to come back. But it's interesting because I'm new to Anderson, so I've only been there a year. And so, I got here, and everyone kept saying, "Oh, we're UCLA," and the phone just rings, and everybody wants to do business with you. And I started in December, and I'm like, "Hey, when's the phone gonna ring?" hey, I thought we were UCLA. Nobody knew about Goizueta, and it was top school, but nobody can say it, and so I can understand why the phone doesn't ring there. But you're UCLA, why doesn't the phone ring? And the phone hasn't rung. And so I would say what's interesting for me in terms of what am I doing differently. So to some degree, I'm kind of reshaping, relaunching our brand. And what we do is the first thing is get the culture of the team of 20 that supports me, get them aligned with what our strategy is, and really just kind of focusing on what is important and what does that alignment look like, and what kind of experience do I need to create for my clients and potential clients and for my team, and is all of that aligned? And then it's really a lot of, I can go out and sell all day. No one's really buying, so I'm going out and trying to get information. So it's kind of networking to another degree. And then as I have these conversations with EVPs of UPS and CEOs of Home Depot and both my old clients and my new clients, is trying to pull all of that together. So someday, hopefully in the next 2011 is what I'm predicting is the rise of executive education again. But they'll be there, and I'll be smarter for it.
I was actually thinking just very quickly that how many of you have thought or have pursued contracting jobs?
Yeah.
Okay. So my feeling is, I went back to do contracting work as my little nest egg got smaller and smaller. And I guess I think that more and more we're going to have to cobble together incomes instead of thinking we're going to have a full-time job in one company for the next year or two. Maybe we're going to have three, whatever it is, cobbling together.
I prefer to call it a portfolio career. It sounds
That's good.
Portfolio of incomes.
And
You can put that in the white paper.
as I say in Silicon Valley, I like eating my own dog food, because if you can't practice what you preach, there's no point preaching it. And I saw this coming, this downturn, and a lot of people didn't believe me, but I sold my house in 2005 in Los Gatos because I saw it coming, and did other things with my money. I developed what I would recommend. You're all MBAs, I hope, or mostly. what do? You expand your market demographics, and that's what I've done. I used to work with people just in Silicon Valley. How many coaches do you know in Silicon Valley? One on every block, along with real estate agents and mortgage brokers. So I work with people globally now, not even nationally, globally. I've got clients in Holland, I've got clients in Seoul, I've got clients in Singapore, I've got clients in Dubai. And the internet, live meeting with Microsoft, go to webinar, voice over IP, all of the tools that now exist have made it a very, very small world and enabled me to do that very easily. The other thing I've done, which you know to do in business, is increase your revenue streams. Okay, you have the product, and you have different markets you can sell it to, but what other kinds of products can you add in to build revenue streams as well? So I do webinars. I'm being paid for writing. I'm being paid to deliver webinars. I'm creating products that are going to go up on my new website, which is actually a blog, not a website, WordPress. It's open source. So what you want to do is take what's new, take the technology, take what you've got now, and look how you can find the road less traveled, expand, and grow from where you've been.
Executive search businesses, what are you doing differently during this transition?
Mike just alluded to it. I think we're in professional services. Our business is down, and I think what we're doing is staying close to our clients. I think there's more empathy now. I think everybody's in this together, and I think there is a positive effect in reaching out to people and just continuing to express empathy towards those that are in a displaced situation. I think again, it's really continuing to leverage the network that you have, staying close and working it.
It's very similar to what your job search would be, right? Actually, there's another way of looking at this. This is the first time in, 5 years, people have had a chance to take a breather. And, you're thinking, well, I've got time on my hands. I'm looking for a job. Well, executives who are in jobs, they have more time on their hands, so they'd be probably interested in getting to know you. It's look at it as an opportunity to plant a bunch of seeds in your network now that in the next 12 to 18 months are gonna pay off. So we're out there busy doing things we always wish we had time to do but didn't have the time to do.
Often in a downturn, you are presented with opportunities to take a step back, whether in your own company or going into a new situation. So when's that a good idea? When's it a bad idea?
Remember, I think the very first question was, what would people think about assessing career and life choices? And I said, vision forward. If you're going to do something like that, make sure you're doing it for the right reason. If there's an end goal and you kind of have a discontinuity between you and that goal, and you have to take this step sideways and down, and you can get there, then maybe it's worthwhile. But if you're kind of doing it because it's forced upon you, or I would say you got to have a really good reason, because every single employer from then on is going to be looking at you and saying, well, this guy took a step back. Why? Not cutting it. They get very suspicious very quickly. So make sure it's a good reason and you have an out on the other side.
And we're assuming that you haven't run out of money, so you're not taking the job because you need the job financially. So that's another good reason that I mean, hold out as long as you can, I guess is the answer. But
I want to address this question with the last one, because a lot of times I've seen VPs of marketing here in Silicon Valley, and think back to the bubble, and we create a lot of VP of marketing opportunities in companies for that top role in a company, but then they disappeared, and we still have all these VPs of marketing. Some of them only a year or two out of school, and they really didn't have the skills to be VP of marketing. And so what you see in Silicon Valley is a lot of, and then there are a lot of companies, think the Apples and HPs of the world, where the companies actually did turn out a lot of, VP level people. And so there's a lot of VP level talent in marketing. And what I see in candidates is the person who is VP of marketing for a year or two, because the average duration of a CMO is 12 18 months. And then they're a consultant for a while. And then they find another opportunity. And I have found candidates who found that it was better to take a director of marketing role because they needed health insurance for their spouse. And they, in a period of 2 or 3 years, they'd have 4 CMOs above them while they still had a director of marketing role. And what I find with these VP level candidates in marketing, it's really about understanding your competencies and strengths and what you can do, and going to work for companies and doing that, and then let everything else fall into place, the title, the compensation, but do those things that are building you towards that future self that you want to build yourself into. But you do see that a lot here in Silicon Valley, and I think kind of going through this transition, thinking about it, it's what are you building yourself into so that you know that the next time, if you're going to lose your job in another 12 to 18 months because the company runs out of funding for a VP of marketing, it's understanding how to do these transitions and be this kind of portfolio approach of getting a job, and it might be this fluid job or consulting, and how do you handle that and tell the story as you're going forward. But I do see a lot of that here in Silicon Valley.
The other piece around this is that Jeffrey Immelt, I think I'm pronouncing it right, the CEO of General Electric, said the other day when he was being interviewed, this isn't a recession, this is a reset. And you really want to approach your career moving forward the same way, because you might be facing a reset. And I encourage all of you to not just have plan A, I'm going to go find I've got competition, and see how long I hold out, and I've got to get the next job and the hidden job market. But what's plan B? What's plan C? And even D and E? What are you going to do if that doesn't work? What's the next thing you can do? What are other opportunities? And you can't just implement, explore, and look at that when you go, oh, God, I need plan B. This has to start all at the beginning. You have to have it lined up. It's about visioning forward. I couldn't agree more. You really have to look at how close you are to retirement, where you are in your career management, where you are in career planning, how far you are in career development. Are you a mid-level executive? If you're a senior executive and you are in your late 50s, you may not be able to go back into where you were before. You might be looking at board positions, working at nonprofit at certain levels, and franchise, small business, consulting, a lot of different other roads you need to take. The young executive got other avenues to pursue. So you need to look at where you are in your career and then have plan B, C, D, and E.
So from a boomer in the audience, what dimension does age have in a job transition?
From your perspective or the world's perspective?
I'll add a perspective that I do have people that come to me both at UCLA and through executive search saying, I'm a little scared, I'm running into a little bit of age discrimination here. How do I address this?
To be honest with you, I don't see a lot of that. Maybe in Silicon Valley, you're just looking for really good talent, and usually somebody who's that far along in their career has a wide range of experiences they can bring to the table. What I do tell my clients is, if they do bring up that concern, which they're not supposed to, but sometimes they do, is I think boomers today are going to be working a heck of a lot longer in their careers than we ever thought. There's a lot of executives who are nearing 70 or over 70, and they're still very active, not just on boards, but at the CEO and direct report levels. There's a lot of people, for example, I just talked to the former chief procurement officer at Dell. He's what, 54? And he's like, what am I going to do for the next 20 years? I can't golf. So I think the definition of how long your career is, it's getting reset. So don't expect, retire at 65 and off golfing. You should probably look at 75. And that's a double-edged sword, because all the younger executives below that who are thinking, I'm going to ride this baby boom, I'm going to be right in the trough, and by the time I'm 45, I'm going to be, CEO. It's like, that's not happening either. So you're going to work a lot longer. I guess that's one way of putting it.
I mean, when people talk about age discrimination, what are they really talking about? They're talking about this person doesn't have energy, this person's going to retire, this person's too expensive. Am I missing anything here? So
they're too good.
Yeah, well, so I guess you have to sort of get to and it's insidious, because you can't always tell that somebody's discriminating against you for age. So if you know that it's happening, or if you can flesh it out, I mean, I think you have to figure out what is it they really mean when they say age, when they're thinking about age, because you can certainly show energy. You can certainly show you're willing to work, and maybe you're not beyond, 65. But let's face it, people only have their jobs in Silicon Valley for about 2 years, and then they move on. So, you have to really address it on a very specific basis, I think.
Pragmatically speaking, you can tell if your age or whatever else about your qualifications is a problem if you don't get the job offer. And so why would you want to work with people that wouldn't want to hire you? And so that's one way to look at it. So the bigger companies tend to like fresh hires, younger hires. Bigger companies tend to do that. When I was in this business back in the 80s, I was seeing people that got laid off in the chip business were in their 40s and 50s and they were obsolete, and they were at a certain management level. Well, AMD was still hiring people out of college. I'm not saying that that's going on now, but I do know EMC just laid off 1,500 people, and they've got 550 openings. So you need to look at where you fit. And it's probably better smaller, probably better different, clean tech, sustainability, offshore, other avenues. And the older we get, the more we have to explore the road less traveled, forks in the road, different options. Because the standard career climb is not available.
The only thing that I would add to that is that what do I think you bring is I think you bring wisdom. And that's different than skills and education. It's kind of a combination of all of it. And, what I'm hearing from large companies and mid-sized companies is that, our high potentials, and some of us are that, right, within our own organizations, they're not ready yet. So to some degree, it's a good thing that it's been reset, right, because things that my office does are help organizations get their high potentials ready to take on these leadership roles. And so the next problem is going to be is that people won't be retiring, and those of us that are in these high potential roles that we're looking for that kind of that officer level role in the next 3 to 5 years, well, that timetable's been now pushed to probably 5 to 7 years. But what you do have are this idea of smaller companies, and I've worked with a lot of them through some private consulting, is that they need the wisdom because they might have a group of people that maybe they bring a couple of high potentials in, but they're not big enough to put them through kind of large-scale leadership development types of activities, and they all think they can be the CEO tomorrow. And so they're still looking for that wisdom from being able to be a good operator, being able to understand finances, et cetera, that you could be a star, potentially, right? Either you create it yourself or find a way to be a part of that. I did some work for a company that makes large air conditioning units that sit on top of hospitals and hotels. And a guy that I had done a lot of work with at Home Depot, who was an officer at Home Depot a couple of years ago, and he turned out he became the CEO of this company. And he called me and he said, "Hey, will you come work with my team on this particular leadership tool?" And I got there, and every single one of the folks that were running this company that were doing multi-million dollars worth of business in Dubai, all were from boomers that had been laid off at GE or at 3M or at Boeing, had all of these different kinds of roles, and they were heading that company. So it was a leadership team of 20 or 30 people that had all this wisdom that these younger folks just didn't have. So
I have to add a perspective. I've always been told the person you go into an opportunity with is the person they're going to see. So if you go in saying, I'm not good enough because, which could be, I think there might be age discrimination, I have to watch this, but that's what they're going to see. So if you go in with that kind of attitude, they're going to see that. But if you go in saying, well, I bring opportunity because of my wisdom, look at, I know there's going to be a lot of products and services geared toward boomers. And look at the wisdom I bring for that. If you come in with that kind of attitude, that's what they're going to see.
Yeah.
One of my clients, and I won't say position or area, got hired here at Stanford during the last downturn. And he had left a very high-level, C-level position at a company. And they had a concern, and they said it to him, we think you're overqualified and you won't stay. And he says, why don't you look at it this way? I'm low maintenance.
So how do you take an entrepreneurial self, and I've actually run into it now in this role at UCLA, where it's not just, Silicon Valley startups, but it's entrepreneurial. I've been an independent consultant or independent business owner for 10 years. And how do I take this back into a corporate world? And I'm assuming then that you have to go back into the same kind of industry or function.
Were you,
how
were
do
you
you make the
CEO?
transition?
Oh, that's great. That's the easiest one. It's easy. It's easy going up, especially if you're a CEO, because you've had your hands on everything. And probably the best way to, it's either going to be the ops management side, so COO, looking in that area, or biz dev, because you had to fundraise. If your company was anywhere near successful or even tried to be, you had to fundraise. That's business development. Look for turnarounds. But for companies that need a turnaround, because they want the entrepreneurs.
Also, divisional presidents. I've had several people go in that route for exactly that reason, that they could get things done. But I think you also have to be able to flex in the corporate environment, which is really different politically. And so I don't know if you've been in that environment to start or whether you have. So just maybe getting your hands on the political or the cultural environment by informationally interviewing or working your network in that regard.
In other words, you may not like it.
Yeah, I mean, there's bureaucracy.
You'll have a boss. Rarely does the ideal job come up. So what's the art of turning down a job? I have to add something. I'm sort of, even though I'm an engineer and scientist by background, I believe in karma. So the proper way to say it is when the ideal job comes up, and the ideal job will come up, but in the meantime, how do I turn down a job?
Nicely. You don't want to burn that bridge. Actually, I just had a guy turn down a job. It's like, wow, you're kidding me. And he was very nice about it. And he said, my company has countered, and it doesn't make sense for me to move. And just be gracious about it and try and help the hiring manager out, because that person has a bit of egg on their face at that point, because he or she has socialized you through the company. He's been your champion. And now he's got to go back and tell everybody that it's not going to happen. So just be as gracious as possible. If there's other people who might be a good fit, pass those people along, and that's another note in your network that you might want to keep alive. So don't burn any bridges.
How do you decide if this is the right job? Now, and I'm going to add a perspective, because you're sometimes evaluating bird in hand versus future. And so you may have to turn down something that isn't right without anything else. Is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
One thing I tell people is the grass is never greener on the other side. It just can look a different shade of green. So I think that's one of the big things. Building on this vision forward concept, and then you have to look: is that a big enough benefit to me in the long term to overcome the switching costs associated with going to a new company with a different political situation? Cash is only part of it. How's that going to affect my family? So you got to line up your variables and weight them and do your spreadsheet and kind of see how it comes out. But I tell everybody it's not greener. You just got to know if you want that shade of green.
Email me and I'll send you a values checklist. In career counseling, that's one of the key assessments I use, more than strengths assessment, because people don't leave jobs because they're not doing what they're not good, that they don't like what they're doing because they're not good at it, because they wouldn't have gotten hired to do it in the first place. And they don't leave because of the money. They leave because their values are unsatisfied. If you do the front-end intervention, look at what your top 10 values are in terms of money, challenge, work style, lifestyle, interaction with people, level of the position, corporate culture, business attributes, all of that, and you have those top 10, then if you ask the right questions right from the beginning in terms of researching sectors, the companies in the sectors, and then specifically in the interview, you ask the right questions. Stop selling yourself when they like you and start asking them find out what's in it for you. Then you can have your little checklist down, and you negotiate the values, not the money. You don't leave your life on the table.
Is the venture capital industry a viable and approachable resource for job seekers?
Are you an entrepreneur, or are you?
I'm interested in smaller companies.
Are you a VC?
No.
But let's just say it's a potential executive in residence, CEO, VP marketing, VP whatever.
So my quick feeling is, why would you not want them in your node, your network node? Even so, you're sort of looking at the short term. Do they have jobs? Versus should they be in? They feel pretty hungry now. They are, but doesn't mean that your jobs, I think, are to stay ahead of the curve. In other words, to stay ahead of the job posting curve, so that the job hopefully never gets posted that they think, we know the guy. So the more people you have in your network, and if that's your arena, then boy, I'd put them in the network and try to work that node.
I'd say using the venture capital community, there's a higher probability that you'd be able to network within their portfolio companies versus potentially landing a job within the firm. I think the firms tend to go handpick the people they want. Right.
How's negotiating in this job market? And if you are lucky to have 2 job offers, can you respectfully leverage one for the other?
Go ahead.
Yeah, you can respectfully leverage it. I don't know how much respect you're going to get from that. So the whole job or compensation negotiation hasn't really changed at all. It's still the same process. Companies have they budget for the role, and they'll stretch as far as they can, but they're not going to break it. Generally, they won't break internal equity issues with your peers in order to bring you on board. And I think in this job environment, there's you're going to have a lot more competition. So I could see companies being a lot more reticent to want to accommodate requests that might be a little out of the ordinary. A little pushing around the edges is expected, but to kind of push the envelope, I think, wouldn't be met with a lot of good feelings these days. In terms of playing one offer against the other, whether it's this environment or any other environment, people know when you're doing that, and nobody really appreciates that. I think it behooves you to understand, what do I want? It's not. This isn't trying to extract more out of A versus B, because that's getting your relationship with your whichever new employer you have off to a really bad start. I would just say, what does my mother-in-law say? All pigs get slaughtered at the end of the day. She's from the East Coast. So if you can negotiate around the edges, find out the issues that are important to you, whether it's cash or if it's an early stage company. It's probably going to be more on the equity side. $5,000 or $10,000 cash isn't really going to do much compared to maybe 1/10 of a point in equity if the thing goes public. So find out what's important to you and stay true to yourself. And I avoid playing one off the other, because that generally generates some bad karma somewhere down the line.
Okay, there's been a question about starting a blog. What topic do you choose?
Oh, I write whatever's on my mind. If you can tell, I've got a lot on my mind, so it's easy. If you're doing a job search, you want to write about either what field are you in? Finance. Yeah, you're going to write about vertical and horizontal. You're going to write about what's new in finance, issues in finance, Sarbanes-Oxley, everything else under the sun that's interesting, and then the sector you're targeting as well. The interesting and easy way to do a blog, which everybody's kind of figuring out, is that if you do our RSS feeds on key sites like Wall Street Journal, Reuters, Economist, and some niche sites that are based on finance or the sector you're in, bring them into your iGoogle page or your Yahoo page, and then you can kind of skim them every day and see what interesting article there is. You pull it out, you take the link, you dump it in your blog posting, and you say, this is a really interesting article. This is my opinion about it. A blog is no more than 200 words, 250 words max. Guy Kawasaki found that out the hard way when he was writing short books. When he first started blogging, that went on forever. Just 200 words, interesting piece of information. It doesn't have to. You don't have to be a thought leader. You can. How you are a thought leader is you have an opinion on somebody else's thoughts. It's lucid. You're cogent, and you just do one every other day, and you've got your blog built. Typepad.com, Blogger.com, or my very favorite because it's open source and you can do whatever you want, is WordPress.com.
Liz uses WordPress, if you didn't catch that. I'm going to add to that. One of the examples I brought up with someone, it wasn't an alum that I was coaching, so I can share this, but he was in finance, and one of the things he said, I don't have any connections with VC world out here. What do I do? I could be a business broker, but I don't know where capital is anymore. And so why don't you go and talk to financing source and find out what are they investing in? What are the criteria? Because they're still trying to do those 99th percentile deals, and most people don't even know who's sitting in those chairs anymore. Why don't you go and do this little study and call up all your contacts and figure out where those sources are, then write your blog about where credit is and what they're investing in. Now not only are you commenting, but now you have original content, and you have a lot of content and brand. And in the course of doing that, guess what? You've become an expert on something, and you can take that expertise and build a business off of it as a business broker. And so it's really, what are those topics that you're good at that you can leverage your network and contacts to go out and find the information and develop some points of view.
Yeah, look, the blogs, I call them the kitty blogs. My kitty did this today and my kitty did that. It's like the Twitter thing. You have to have, I think, value-add opinions. Yeah. Let's call it content. So think of yourself like a reporter, like a little cub reporter. And actually, you get out to talk to people, and it's amazing how, people who you think, why in the world is this person? I'm just a blogger. Well, they love to have it because the newspapers are disappearing. Bloggers tell the truth, and some of them have original content. So you don't really have anything to lose.
Is it important to have a following, the right following with your blog?
May only be 200 people, if it's the right 200 people. So who in your industry has to follow?
I don't think anybody reads my blog. I don't care. It doesn't matter. What matters is that with Google's algorithms, you want you as your brand and profile to come up on the first page when they put your name in or when they type some really relevant keywords, and either kind of search. So Twitter will do that with Twitter profiles, Facebook profiles, LinkedIn profiles, and blogs. Blogs always trump websites. So if you're going to build a website for your personal branding and your resume, put it on a blog platform. It will get up higher in Google's algorithm. And the whole purpose of all of this stuff is to have your, not just 15 minutes of fame, folks. It's got to be eternal at this point, the way the world's going. So you want to stay visible and branded online.
Yeah, I just, not to belabor this point, but I actually used my name, Liz Hager. There are other Liz Hagers out there. My website would always come up above the Liz Hager who was the state senator in New Hampshire, who ran John Anderson's campaign, for those of us who remember John Anderson. And I was always shocked. So sometimes Google does things you don't really understand what it's doing. Just another point of reference.
Okay, resume is still the currency. We'll agree to that. And what are some do's and don'ts with your resume?
First thing is just be honest. Surprisingly, every now and then somebody is not truthful about a stint of employment, trying to bridge a gap to not show a period of unemployment, degrees. Just make sure everything's accurate, because in today's market, things will be checked. I think we typically go directly to experience, delineating title and responsibilities and accomplishments. We skip past long positioning statements. So keep it succinct, keep it readable, and keep it accurate.
And don't laundry list. Find 3 accomplishments per job. I don't know. There's no magic formula. And bullet point them. And then put your responsibilities in a little paragraph, no more than 2, maybe 3 sentences underneath your job title, and bullet point those accomplishments. And what are accomplishments? Accomplishments are impact that you had, hopefully positive, on the company, hopefully measurable. And if they're not measurable, they're always comparative. Better, good is descriptive, better is comparative, and best is optimal, right? So when you're talking about how to describe your accomplishments, if you can't come up with numbers, then do come up with comparative terms.
I'm a little different. I say have two resumes. Have one that's a 2-pager, because everybody says you got to have a 2-pager. And I look at a 2-pager and say, I have no idea what you did. But I want a long one. Your resume is your opportunity to tell your whole career story. And if you interview with me, I'm going to be all the way so tell me where you grew up, and their eyes roll back. But then I find the more I know about you, the more I can predict how well you're going to fit into the situation we're talking about. So take your time. You can have a short one and then a long one. Take your time to tell your story the way you want it to tell. However, there's a couple things I want in there. I want to know your title. I want to know who you reported to. I want to know if you had a P&L or a budget and how much those were. And I want to know how many people you had in your organization and where they're located. So I want to know your scale and I want to know your scope. I want to know that scope on a global basis. Those are really the key things. And to Liz's point, don't use qualitative comments to say what you did. You can say, well, I kind of did this. Back it up with numbers, because say, this is where I started, this is where I ended, this is how much I delivered, because then you can see the value. And if you're working with an executive recruiter who's well-versed in a certain area, they're going to know the history of that company at that particular point in time where you were, and they'll know whether that accomplishment was easy or that accomplishment was hard. And chances are the recruiter's going to know 2 or 3 other people who worked at that organization at the same time, and he's going to call that person up. So we're going to check you 3 times north. So don't lie. Don't overstate and don't lie.
And this is also incredibly much discussed, if not to say controversial, but older people always ask me, should I put all my experience on the resume? And you always get some agency kid who wants you to take it off because they want to hide the fact that you're older. And maybe people on the panel are going to disagree with me, but I always say don't leave things off. If you want to shorten the earlier stuff to just lines, fine. But if you leave things off and people look at your resume and think they're going to meet a 30-year-old and they end up meeting a 50-year-old, well, first there's a sort of surprise. But secondly, they think, what was this person hiding or wanting to hide from me? So you're not hiding anything, so don't hide it.
Put your photo on LinkedIn, they'll see you.
Yeah.
But not on your resume. 3 rules. Your resume is your argument. Everything on your resume needs to be an argument for what you want to go and do, not what you did. It's not your obituary. You cannot be fired for what you omit from your resume, only what you inaccurately state. So if you want to leave some things off because you don't want to do those things anymore, and when you talk about accomplishments, 3 of them, if you've had a long career and been in multiple companies, you probably can come up with 10 bullets, just 3, and the ones that are the arguments for what you want to go do. Keep in mind that 99% of the time they're going to be reading this resume on a screen, not on a piece of paper. It is not done anymore to do it in Times Roman, because nobody writes a website in Times Roman. Too hard to read on a screen. Format your resume so that it's easy to read on a screen as if it was a web page.
I'm going to add a couple more points on the format. I agree. If you're looking at a lot of resumes, it has to be at least 11 or 12-point font, and save it at 100% so it opens up full screen and you see the first 2/3 of it. Because if you're at 150%, we see 2 lines. Gone. The second thing. Oops.
No typos either. That's gone.
Oh, gone. A second thing is. If companies are using scanning software to put your resume into databases, if you have your name and your address and contact information in a header, it might not get picked up half of the time, so your name will be summary. So I would not put your information, your contact information embedded in a header. You know, they may pull up and it's not even on the resume. Third thing is that cover letter that you all dread is really important. And I don't mean a lengthy one. I mean that it has to state who you are, what you do, and your accomplishments very succinctly. I still get whole page cover letters that I still don't know what that function is and what that person does. And then you have to open up the resume to even see what their industry is. And so I really think that you direct that resume, that cover letter, Mike, John Smith referred me because I worked in clean tech at, this solar company as a VP of business development. I'm interested in, boom, 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 right there. That tells Mike, this is one I want to look at because I do a lot of searches in this area. I had one more fourth point. Fourth point, Mike said he likes looking at long resumes. That doesn't mean lots of words. It means that every word on that resume still needs to have a purpose on that resume. I think that most resumes that I see need to go on word diets and succinctly say what they want to, because if the chances are if you do a five-line paragraph, I won't even read that. But if you can say that same thing in a line and a half, there's a better chance that I will read that point. So he wants to see all the information, but it doesn't mean a lot of words. So those are kind of my format.
And the only other thing I'd add to the cover letter is never, ever send a general cover letter. Do enough research on the company or the person that you're sending it to, or if it's a job position, know enough of the hiring criteria so you can map your skills, let's call it, or competencies to what they are looking for or what you think they might be looking for because you've done some research on the company.
One final thing on a cover letter. Never put anything in your cover letter that's not in your resume because they may not read it.
What do you mean?
They may not read the cover letter. And if you've got leave
points.
all the good stuff for the cover letter and it's not in your resume and they don't read that cover letter, then you have a problem. So make sure that the cover letter reflects competencies and skills and abilities you've already embedded in the resume.
I want to thank all our panelists who have given tonight.